Wow. So the first time that I was ever here in the Carolinas, I found my way to the front lines of protests that were unfolding in Charlotte. And I knew that there was going to be a need for a peacekeeper and someone to step in as a leader in the midst of such a volatile situation that was unfolding there. And it was very difficult going in, especially being from California and showing up in Charlotte on the front lines and not knowing anyone there. And there's hundreds of protesters all downtown, and the police had set up their lines. And as I was running in to the protests, everyone was running out because a protester had just been shot in the face by another protester. And so the anger and the tension that was unfolding there that night, it was unlike any other protest I had ever been to before. And so right away I tried to create a barrier between the police and the protesters because people were throwing bottles and rocks and bricks at the police officers. And so I decided, well, I'll try to open up and engage in some dialogue with some people and stand there on the front lines. And so, that night there were a number of police lines like that were blocking a number of the intersections. And it became very tough to communicate when you have hundreds of people not only shouting, but throwing things. And so I decided I was going to try to lead by recruiting other peacekeepers there on the front lines. And so oftentimes when I show up at these things, I try and identify who's the biggest, scariest looking guy that's there on the front lines and say, hey, I'm going to need you on my side just in case things get really out of hand. I'm a slim guy, but together, enough of us can keep the peace out here. And so there was a gentleman who was standing on the side, and I watched as someone bumped into him, and he said, hey. And then the guy, he apologized a number of times, and he just stood there, and I figured, okay, that's the guy that I want on my side, because they respect this guy. And so I went and found him, and I got him to throw up the peace sign as well and try to calm the crowd. And in doing so, if you notice, we're standing under an overpass there. And as he's got his peace sign up, I noticed that there were a number of protesters, 3 guys that had picked up one of those cement parking stops when you go to park a car. And they were going up to the overpass, and they were planning to drop the cement block down on the row of officers that were beneath us. And so I rush over there, and I'm shouting at them saying, hey, man, you guys know that if you drop that on the cops down there, you're probably going to kill a couple of officers. And they said, that's right. They took one of ours, so we're going to take 2 of theirs. And it really made me realize that this whole back and forth violence, we're never going to be able to solve anything without open dialogue and peacekeepers being there on the front lines. And so the entire night, I'm running around trying to put out small fires. Literally, too, there were actually fires being set as well as just the things that were unfolding there. And, it was difficult being a stranger in that town and trying to have a voice, but I was surprised that it worked out. And fortunately, there was a police officer who recognized me as I was walking by, and he had asked me for a hug. And that moment kind of turned things around where the protesters who were cooperating with me and listening to me for some time, they saw me as a traitor because I hugged this riot police officer that was in full gear. And in doing so, they start shouting back and forth at the cops. They're disrespecting me, calling me a sellout and all sorts of things. And I knew that at that moment, I could either rush back to my car and hurry up and get out of there, or I can stand and fight for peace. And so in doing so, I had to match their voice level. So I wouldn't necessarily say I was shouting at them, but when everyone's shouting at you, you can't be very timid in trying to respond to them. So as I'm responding to them, I was able to actually de-escalate that situation and get them to stop throwing rocks and things at the police officers. And so, so we hugged it out. Things were cool between myself and the officer, but actually even these protesters who wanted to fight me at a point, we eventually shook hands and hugged it out as well, and I was able to bring peace to that situation. And I realized that, it doesn't take much to be a leader when you show up in a situation, just being able to really turn people around through dialogue and positive interaction and communication. And so I always encourage people to, when you're in a situation where there's a leader that's needed, never hesitate to rise up and be that person. I think we often look around trying to find, well, is someone going to step up and try to calm this down? Oh, the police are here, and is someone going to calm this situation down? And, so this situation that took place here, it always reminds me of a story that I heard back at September 11th, actually. And we all remember the images of the planes that hit the two towers and the plane that hit the Pentagon. But what we don't see is a plane that hit the Capitol building. And the reason why we don't see that is because of a leader and a hero who stepped up that was on one of the planes as he took a phone call from his wife. And some of you may know this story, and for those of you that don't, there was a gentleman or a number of gentlemen that were on Flight 93 that was headed for either the Capitol building or the White House. And there was a gentleman on the phone who called his wife, and he let her know that his plane had been hijacked. And she said, yeah, and they're using those planes to hit targets. And he said, well, they turned our plane around that was headed for San Francisco, and they're en route back to the East Coast. And they told us that there's a bomb on board, and they've already stabbed someone on the plane. And so, she had let him know, well, don't draw any attention to yourself. Just have a seat, be quiet, and things will be okay. And he realized at that moment that things aren't going to be okay, and he needed to step up as a leader to make sure that that plane wasn't going to hit the target. And as I read through the telephone transcripts of what that call was like, it broke my heart as he asked his wife, where are the kids? And she said, they're having breakfast. And she said, they'd like to talk to you. And he said, no, not right now. We're going to take this plane back. And in doing so, he rallied up the support of a few other men that were there on the plane. And the recorder, one of the last things that they heard was as the guys had rallied up and they were trying to get through the doors to fight the terrorists. And you can hear the terrorists shouting, hold the doors, because there's men trying to get in here. And then you hear the fighting, and then they were able to prevent that plane from hitting the Capitol building there. And the famous words that I always remember from them was okay, you guys ready? Let's roll. And it took that leadership of someone being able to step up and say, these planes are being used as weapons to kill people, and thousands of people were killed there. But a leader was able to step up and not only fight for peace and be brave, but to make sure that they were saving the lives of other Americans. And so in recent weeks, now I found myself out on the front lines of protests again in Washington, D.C. that were taking place outside the inauguration. And same thing, now I figured, okay, now I'm here in Washington, D.C., and that was my first time ever in my life being in Washington, D.C., and same thing, people are throwing rocks and bottles and bricks, actually, at the police officers there. And I knew a peacekeeper is going to be needed, and someone's going to have to take charge and be a leader at these protests where things are just out of control. And so, same thing that day, I rallied up the support of other men that were standing around in Washington, D.C., and let them know, all these bricks that we're seeing on the ground and trash cans and bottles that are being thrown at these police officers, we can stand as a barrier to prevent things from being thrown at the police, and we can go and talk to the protesters as well to try to bring peace and de-escalate that situation. And, I'm just one slim guy that shows up at these things, and I'm able to sometimes turn the situation around just by not only opening up dialogue and communication, but rising to the call when a leader is needed and someone needed to be able to bring peace to these situations. And I look at all of the people around, not only in this room, but across the nation, and I see how much we're all calling for change. And it just seems like we're all waiting for that leader to rise up. Everyone is in search of a leader, but we're not looking within ourselves to be that leader. And there's a countless amount of followers, but very few leaders in this world that are really willing to step up and create change. And so now when I travel around, I always encourage people, you can change the world and you can create the change that you want to see, rather than saying, I wish that guy would step up and do something. or being in a situation and saying, I hope that woman is going to say something. Why not you be that person and step up and do it, and we can make this world a better place? Thank you.